All right, good evening, Safety Harbor. Thank you for joining me. My name is Scott Long. I'm running for Safety Harbor City Commission seat number 3. I've lived here in Safety Harbor with my wife Laura for more than 19 years now. I used to be a commissioner here in the city. I've been extremely active before then and very, very active since I left office. And now it's time for me to serve again. So that's why I'm running. And I hope you'll take some time to get to know me if you don't know me. And you can go to votescottlong.com. All right, good evening, Safety Harbor. Thank you for joining me. The web address is right there on the screen. So, um, obviously, with COVID, we are in a new way of dealing with everything, right? So, and that includes campaigning. So, we need to come up with new approaches to reach you, the voters. And during this pandemic, one of the things I was most proud about was creating a Facebook group called Safety Harbor Strong, which now has more than 4,400 members. It's a fantastic place to get a laugh, ask for help, get some inspiration. And as part of that, my friend Megan and I, who is a co-administrator, now the full administrator of the group, we did a couple of talk shows throughout the early stages of COVID when we were all locked down, and it turned out to be a lot of fun. And so I figured that approach might work during the campaign. So that's what we're going to be doing. And every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, we will be doing another one of these broadcasts right here in Vote Scott Long's Facebook page. Each night, we're going to do a different topic. And feel free to post questions in the comments section. And after I get over cover all the information I want to be sure you know about my views on these issues, I will be happy to answer questions. And then these videos will be archived on Vote Scott Long. We'll also upload them to YouTube so you can share them with your friends who aren't on Facebook anymore. So with that, tonight's show is all about our economy. Now, why did I pick economy for the first topic? And the reason for that is when I'm knocking on doors, talking to voters, the first thing I always ask you folks is, what are the issues that matter to you? Because ultimately, I'm a public servant if I'm elected, and I want to do the things that you want done, in addition to the things that I want done. And with very few exceptions, when I ask that question, the ideas you give back to me, they all invariably are going to require some level of money. It's just the reality of the world. So, if you think about it in that term, the economy really is what drives everything else that we're going to talk about from now until election day, and all the other issues you care about, I care about. So we need to find ways to generate revenue to be able to pay for all those great ideas. So if you think about it in the terms of your own household, right? So when things are good, let's say both of your spouses, you and your spouse are both have great jobs, good income, enough money to pay for everything that you need, your family needs, and obviously a lot of the things that you want, right? Those when times are good like that, you're happy, right? You're not stressed out, and those things don't affect the rest of your life. Now, imagine for a moment that there's a change in your household. Maybe you or your spouse gets laid off or furloughed, or maybe one of your children is now going to college and you're paying for that, or there's a medical event that is not completely covered by your insurance. And so now your financial situation's changed, right? So with when that happens, now you probably are not going to be able to afford all the things you want, and you may not even be able to afford all the things you need. And that's when we start to get angry and stressed out, and that affects the rest of our lives, right? So our cities are no different than that, right? So when times are good and tax revenues are high, we're able to afford to do all the things that you expect of a city and all the things that you want the city to do, or the commissioners, or myself would want to have done in the city, right? But when tax revenues fall off and we don't have enough revenue to do the things that we want to do, and maybe not even to be able to afford the things that we need to do, that's when we get restless as citizens, and that stress permeates throughout our city. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? Safety Harbor is a fantastic, fantastic place to live. You know that, I know that. And we've been very good financially for a long time since we came out of the 2008 recession. And my goal as a commissioner, when I served before and certainly now, is to maintain those good times. So we're not worried about things that other cities are worried about, and we have the freedom and the money to do the things that we really are different and unique and make Safety Harbor one of the most fantastic places to live. So, um, there's going to be a term that I'm going to use a lot, and I use it when I talk to residents, when I'm knocking on your doors, when I'm in endorsement meetings, when I'm talking to really anybody about the city, and that's organic tax revenue. And so here's what I mean by that. So the city has obviously a lot of different funding sources, and they're all important. But the biggest one is our property taxes. That's where we generate most of our general fund money that pays for all these ideas that you're telling me about when I knock on the door, and the ideas that I'm going to lay out throughout this campaign. Um, we are very, very blessed here in Safety Harbor to have one of the lowest tax rates in Pinellas County. Our millage rate is 3.95. There are only a couple cities that have a lower millage rate, and those are those beach communities with the big, expensive condos. But if you compare our tax rate to Dunedin, Oldsmar, Tarpon Springs, the cities that we usually try to compare ourselves to, we are the lowest of that. And that tax rate has been consistent for a long time, certainly when I was in office and through now. And our goal is to keep it that way. So we want to keep that tax rate low. We don't want to have to raise taxes each year to pay for certainly not things that we need, but for those things that we want. So how do you do that without raising taxes? Well, you generate, again, organic tax revenue. And so what I mean by that is this money comes from property taxes. So when our property values go up, we are generating more tax revenue, even if the tax rate stays at 3.95. That money, that the difference between what we had last year and this year, if that happens, is the organic tax revenue. We didn't go out and do anything specific to raise that money, but because everything that we've done as a city makes Safety Harbor more desirable to live, has created that money. I don't want to say out of thin air, but that's in a weird way, that's exactly what we're talking about. We've created money out of nothing that now we can use for very good things. Think about it like this. So if you go in your closet and you take out a pair of jeans and you reach in the pocket and you find a $20 bill, right? That's great. The difference between that scenario and what I'm talking about is that $20 bill you just forgot. You had it at one point, you forgot about it, you didn't know you had it. Now it's like money found, but it was there before. With organic tax revenue, that $20 really came from the money ferry, right? So it didn't really exist before, but we created it by, again, making Safety Harbor such a desirable place to live. So that is what our ultimate goal is. Certainly my ultimate goal as a commissioner is to keep that tax rate low, but still generate as much of that organic tax revenue as we can. So how do we do that? That's the big question. And the answer to that is that we maintain the highest quality of life that we can have here in Safety Harbor. So we want to make Safety Harbor the most desirable place to live. We all know that because we already live here, right? But we have to maintain that. You got to keep working at it like you do with anything else. And so the goal is, if folks want to move and buy a house, we want them to say, hey, I want to be in Safety Harbor and only Safety Harbor. I don't want to consider Dunedin or Oldsmar or Pinellas Park. I think what's going on in Safety Harbor is so exciting that that's where I want my family to move. And if we can do that, then the property values continue to go up, and then we don't have to consider any of these other options on the table, including raising the tax rate. Now, what do we mean by quality of life? Well, that answer, there's probably 18,000 different answers from the 18,000 citizens in Safety Harbor. So everybody has a different one. Maybe you think that a bustling downtown is what makes Safety Harbor great. Maybe you love the fact that we have so many parks and green spaces. Maybe you like the level of service the city gives from our public works and fire department and other things like that. All kinds of things go into that quality of life. And we're going to talk about quality of life a lot more next week. That's going to be the topic of that show. But for now, those are some of the things that we're talking about. So the key to all of those things is balance. And that's going to be a word you're going to hear me talk about all the way up through March 9th as well, too. there's things that I want to do. There's things my opponent wants to do. Things that other of the other commissioners, candidates that want to do, and the commissioners we have now want to do. Right, and they're all based on conversations with you. And so, what is great for you may not be great for your neighbor. What your neighbor wants may be great for them, but maybe not for you. So that doesn't mean we don't do those things. It just means that we have to have a balance. We have to do things that make both you happy and your neighbor happy. And if we can do that and find a way that everybody is happy with the compromise that we need to come up with, that is when we really truly have a great quality of life where the little things are the ones that you worry about. As long as we can get to the fact that we're just worried about the little things in Safety Harbor, that is when we've really achieved that high quality of life. So it's not about doing this or that. It's about doing both, but in balance, so they work together. All right, so obviously there are downsides to this approach, and I've always been honest when I was on commission, and I will always continue to be honest about the downsides of things that I'm supporting, as well as other ideas that we have. And what I like to say is that you don't not do something because there's a downside. Because almost everything that we want to do, every idea we have, has some level of downside. Some have more than others, some have less, but they all have downsides. So what we need to do is find a way to mitigate those downsides. So you don't, again, the old cliche, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's exactly what we're talking about. So if you like that baby, let's find a way to deal with the bathwater as well too. Another way of looking at it, let's say you go to a restaurant with a friend, and there's a fantastic appetizer that the waiter has suggested, but he also gave you a fantastic dessert idea as well too. You only have money for one, so do you not get the appetizer because you can't afford the dessert? No, that's silly. You're going to get one or the other, right? Or if you're very creative, maybe you'll talk to your friend and say, "Hey, is there an appetizer and a dessert that maybe we can split?" And that way we get a little bit of an appetizer, a little bit of dessert, and get a little bit of everything. And so that kind of compromise is really what we're talking about as we go forward with this stuff. So again, it's not an all or nothing. If the idea is good, let's do it. But it's also work on mitigating and making that negative side less negative. Um, okay, so one of the other things that you might say is even if the tax rate stays flat, as it has at 3.95, if your property values go up, you're paying more taxes. That is absolutely correct. I'm never going to say that's not the case. Again, that's where the organic revenue comes from. So I know I made a joke about the money fairy, but the money actually comes from somewhere, right? And it comes from the fact that your property value has increased, and so you're paying more taxes even though the tax rate hasn't. So here's what I've always told folks when I was on commission and up until now. I've issued this challenge. I've said, all right, if you don't want to pay the extra increase in city taxes, I will be happy, pleased, to take the increase in the value of your home and pay your increase in your taxes for you. I have not had anybody take me up on that. And let me explain why no one's going to take me up on this. So, if you are a property owner, you're probably familiar with this. It's called your trim notice. You get it every year during budget season when both the Safety Harbor City Commission and all the other taxing authorities set the maximum millage rate. So, that's the maximum that they're allowed to approve. Now, they don't have to approve it at the max. They may go lower, but they can't go higher, if that makes sense. So what it does is on your trim notice is it gives you a good picture of where things were last year and things were this year. And it gives you a picture at how much more money you are going to have to pay in taxes if the city, in this case, the city approves the proposed millage rate versus if they keep the millage rate the same. Or something as a called a rollback, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I just looked at our trim notice before we did the show tonight. And last year we kept the tax rate at 3.95, as I mentioned. Fantastic, right? And so our home, the assessed value of it went up by a little bit more than $4,000. That's great, right? So that's another part of what we're talking about is if you are like me and my wife, our biggest investment is this home that I'm recording from. So not only are we able to, with that organic tax revenue, do great things for our city, but we're also building wealth, and that's a good thing, right? So our assessed value went up 4,000 last year. Our taxes went up $17. Our city taxes went up $17. Now, obviously, there's other taxes involved too. So, which would you rather have? Would you rather have that extra $4,000 in value in your house and not pay that $17 in taxes, or the other way around? And that's why no one's taken me up on this challenge. So, you got to think of it in that terms, and then also in the actual dollar amount. Again, $17. That's not even dinner out for my wife and I every year, and that's the increase by the organic increase without changing the tax rate, but we are contributing $17 more, right? So, as I mentioned, the rollback. This is always there's always a small group of citizens that want to talk about the rollback. So, what the rollback means is think of it in what I just mentioned. If we keep the tax rate at 3.95, property went up. That's the money that we're generating. The additional money we're generating is what we're focused on, right? You can look at it the opposite way if you want to focus on the rollback. The rollback is how do you keep the same amount of money you generated last year with the tax rate, and that'll mean the tax rate goes lower. The real concern we have with going with a rollback is one, now you're not adding any tax revenue to the city each year. And the problem with that is that all of our expenses go up every year. So our insurance for our employees goes up drastically every year. It costs more every year to have the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department provide law enforcement for us. Utility cost, anything. And you know this in your own life, right? The costs go up. So if costs are going up, but we're bringing in the same amount of revenue, we're actually losing or we're falling behind. So that's not a good thing. So not only can we not do these new things we want to do, we can't even afford to do the things we did before. And that's going to force us to cut services or do some other things. And those costs will probably be much more dramatic to you than the rollback rate. And for example, the rollback rate last year, had we had our commission voted for the rollback rate, my wife and I would have saved $11. Now we don't know what would have happened by saving that $11, but I promise you, whatever it wasn't worth the $11. So you got to keep that in mind with the rollback. And of course, if you continue to roll back, you can only roll back so far before you have no tax revenue. So keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons I generally never really consider the rollback rate, and I don't think other commissioners do. And again, we need to keep moving forward. And the final downside is, hey, Scott, I don't own property, or my kids grew up here and they moved away, and now they want to move back to Safety Harbor, and because the property is so expensive here, they can't move in. That is a very real concern, and that's probably the biggest concern with this approach. So, what do? Again, we don't not do this stuff to get that tax revenue, but we try to mitigate that as much as we can. And one of the things that I pushed for when I was commissioner before, and I will continue to push for, the thing that we need in our city is more alternative housing units. All right. So my wife and I live in a 4-bed, 2-bath home here in a subdivision, like many of you do. That doesn't work for everyone. That doesn't work for singles for the most part. It doesn't work for couples for a lot of part. And even if it did, it could be too expensive. So that's why it's important for us to look for opportunities where appropriate and where they fit. And that's very important, where appropriate and where they fit. Apartments, condos, townhomes, alternative things like that. And then another thing that is really important now is to look at accessory dwelling units. And we'll talk about this in future shows as well too. But allowing mother-in-law suites on property for those folks that just don't need a lot of space. But that housing now becomes affordable, and now you can come and live in Safety Harbor while we can still generate this organic tax revenue to help us out. So it's not a perfect solution, but again, on balance, that is what we need to do to keep moving forward. Okay, so that's the organic tax revenue. A couple more things I want to talk about before I take your questions. One, obviously, we're in the middle of COVID-19. This has had a dramatic financial impact on all of us, or at least most of us, I would say. And if you are at home and have really struggled with this, I just want to say I have too. 12 years ago, my friend and I quit our jobs. We started a business. We grew it into something great. It's been one of the best things I've done in my life. Our company has been all but idled since March. We're making just enough money to pay our bills. I'm lucky. I have a wife who has a great job, so that has helped. But you may not be that lucky. So this has been a terrible, terrible financial burden for us individually, and certainly for our businesses as well too. And we're going to need to find our way out of it. And I also don't think that the true financial implications of COVID have happened yet. So we were very lucky as a city in our budgeting process this year that we didn't have to make any changes. City actually saved some money by reduced staffing. Um, so next year's budget cycle will be key. We'll have to see what happens then, and maybe it's not even next year. Maybe it's a year after that. At some point, there will be a reckoning for what we lost out on this year, and we're going to have to find ways to address that. One of the big things, again, is going back to the organic tax revenue. So throughout COVID, one of the good things in terms of a city budgeting process is housing values haven't fallen. Um, I have a friend that's trying to move into town and can't get here, right? So that's good. So that's again a reason why we need to keep that going. As long as we can keep that going, the effects of COVID are going to be lessened on the city budget. Now, we also have a very vibrant business community here. I'm a strong supporter of our business community. When we moved here 19 years ago, downtown was, I don't want to say dead, but it was not lively. 19 years later, we have a downtown that is the envy of a lot of them. When we first moved here, my wife and I would go to Dunedin for dinner every night. Now we rarely ever leave Safety Harbor to go dinner. And there's a lot more shops. There's more things downtown to do. It's a much more walkable community, and that's fantastic. Um, but we need to be sure that those businesses can come out the other side of this COVID. And most have been trying really hard. They've been doing really good things to really creative to stay alive. Fortunately, the CARES Act money that Pinellas County has helped tremendously. Most have qualified for PPP loans, and now the second round is open, so hopefully they will get some more, and those are forgivable, hopefully. But our businesses still need our support. So we need to get out there and make sure that to the extent that we're comfortable getting out and supporting those businesses, that we do. And one of the things I've done in the past year is look for creative ways to encourage you to go out and support our business community. I put together a watermelon walk this year that allowed you to go sample watermelon drinks and dishes at different businesses, and all that could have been done by takeout as well too if you weren't comfortable eating in. We also created a wine walk to replace the wine festival is canceled this year, and a much more safe way of doing it. So rather than closing off roads and having big crowds, instead, we encourage you to walk and support those businesses at your own comfort level. So we need to continue to be creative in coming up with ways of doing that until we get to the point where we can get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, right? Additionally, we need to continue to look at things that we can help as a commission in a city help these businesses get through this. Right now, our commission has very fortunately allowed for a couple months of relaxed code enforcement on some minor things like signage and or tents for outdoor seating. And we need to continue that and maybe even go a little bit farther and find other ways of helping these businesses until we get to the point that these vaccinations are in much more wide use and we can again get back to that new normal. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about before we take your questions is our city reserves. So this is a good thing, bad thing, in my opinion. So what happens every year? First of all, our city is so very well run financially. In the budget process, we always overestimate expenses and underestimate revenues. And on top of that, we have fantastic department heads that run tight ships. So what does that mean? Is usually every year we end up not spending every dollar that we budgeted. That's a good thing, right? So what then happens to that money? Well, one of the things I learned when I was on commission is that we don't really tell you what happens to that. We just essentially throw it into our unrestricted reserve fund and go about our day. Now, that might be the best thing to do, but I do think we need to have more discussions about that. And here's one of the reasons that I have concerns about that. So our city has an ordinance that establishes the amount of money we need to keep in our reserve fund. Our level is what the state considers the gold level. So it's the highest standard. So we are doing exactly what we should be doing from a state standpoint, way more than other cities. So that's fantastic. So we're well protected against hurricanes, other things like that, or an economic downturn like we are bracing for now, right? The problem for me though is when we get this money at the end of the year, we just throw that into the same pot. So we're already at a high level of reserves, and every year we keep adding more and more and more and more to it. Now, again, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it's up to the tune of $8 million now that's sitting there, earning very little interest, waiting for a horrible, horrible rainy day. So obviously, now we are dealing with COVID, which we just mentioned, so it might come in handy and might end up being a smart policy based on how we come through it. But if not, um, we have a lot of money there. So a couple things I think need to happen. We need to have a better discussion during the budget process at the public meetings about how much money we didn't use last year, because and then what we're going to do with it, because the fact that we are doing so well like that should be something that our citizens know very well. So that's part of that discussion. But also, um, what do we are there things that we should be doing with that money other than saving it? Some years we should save it, some years we shouldn't. So what I'm worried about is the opportunity cost that we miss. Obviously, putting that money in the bank for the rainy day, when the rainy day comes, that's great. But is there an opportunity to use some of that money to generate more of this organic tax revenue I'm talking about that will do good things for you as a citizen and our city, while at the same time replenishing with tax revenue? And I'll give you an example. Almost every year for the last since I've been on commission, we've gone through the budget process and we've had about $1 million in unfunded street and sidewalk repair projects. Now that doesn't mean streets don't get repaved and sidewalks don't get repaired, but it just means that we want to get them done quicker, but we just don't have the money in the budget to do it. Well, we are again sitting on about $8 million. So again, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we use that money for those unfunded projects, but imagine this. The thing that is closest to you in the city, right, is the street you live on. So if the street you live on is not being resurfaced because we are unfunded, and it has to wait 5 years or 3 years or whatever to catch up to where it should have been resurfaced, imagine how much more enjoyable you would have had with that road being resurfaced earlier. And again, how much your property value might have increased by that, which again goes back to what? Organic tax revenue. So those are the things that we need to be talking about a little bit more than we have been. And those are the things that the questions I asked when I was a commissioner before, those are the questions I'll continue to ask if I am fortunate enough to be elected on March 9th. So that's all I have for you tonight. Do we have any questions? Nope. Okay. Uh, okay. All right, so I will wait a few minutes here just to see if anybody has any questions for me. But if not, again, I will mention, please go to Vote Scott Long. My website has a lot of information on who I am, what I've done for the city, what my plans are if elected. You can also sign up to volunteer. You can make a contribution, request a yard sign, all that great stuff that will be helpful. I am very happy that, as you can see on the screen, that I've been endorsed by our firefighters union. Fantastic public servants that do great things, and we will talk about them more next week with the quality of life discussion. And a couple things coming up. I believe we have a Zoom candidate forum scheduled for Wednesday. At least I hope it's still scheduled. I am one of 3 of the 7 candidates who have committed to attend. So there'll be details on that being shared pretty shortly. And obviously, be sure to go get registered to vote if you're not registered to vote. It's easy to go to votepinellas.com and check and find out whether you're registered if you're not sure, or to register there. And mail ballots will go out February 2nd. And what we've seen, obviously, through the last year during COVID is that the mail ballots are becoming more popular. They're very easy to do. You can put them in your mailbox, or if you're uncomfortable doing that, you can drop them off at the library or some other drop spots. So feel free to go to votepinellas.com and request a mail ballot and have that sent to you on February 2nd. All right, let's see. All right, so the one question we have so far is, what projects do you see? I would say at this point, we don't have any tremendously big projects in mind. Again, we've accomplished a lot in the couple years since I was on commission in terms of some of those things. One of the big things that, and we'll talk about this in a couple weeks when I do a show on the environment, was that one of the last things I worked on as a commissioner was finding the feasibility to install solar panels on our city properties. I put a lot of work in on it, just ran out of time before I left office. Unfortunately, those efforts ended when I left office, have not been picked up. I would like to think they will be discussed again shortly now that we have a Ready for 100 pledge. But certainly, if I'm elected, that will be one of the projects we'll be talking about. And one of the things I like about that a lot, we just recently had solar panels installed on our house here too, is it's a way to cut down on our electric costs, but the debt burden for the solar panels is usually, or can be, equal to what you would normally spend. So it's not really an expenditure. It just moves money from different funds, which allows us to do some great things. So that would be the big project that I have in mind right now, and we'll see what else comes up. Any other questions? Oh, all right. One more big question here. All right, let's see. All right, there's an issue at Green Springs Enterprise where the bricks have fallen and the city just paved over it. It needs to be restored. With calling the city, said they would look at it and never heard back. There's also a sidewalk that has a drop off along Green Springs that still hasn't been fixed. This is something that money could go toward. Absolutely. Again, those are capital projects. And one of the things about using the reserve fund that I discussed with the commissioners I served with, some were hesitant to use a reserve fund on what they call recurring cost. And I understand that thought. So let's say we hire more staff, right? So you use that money for that this year, but you're going to have to continue to pay that employee for future years. So that's where you have to factor that in. But when you talk about capital cost, like replacing a sidewalk, once you replace that sidewalk, you don't have to keep doing it every year. There'll be a time at some point when you have to redo it again. But again, this is what we're talking about with that money. So that is one of the things that I think citizens need to be, one of the reasons I keep talking about reserves and how much money we have in reserves, because if you're seeing those projects and they're not getting done, it's almost certain to me that it's because it's not in the immediate budget. Because in the immediate budget, it would be getting done. So we obviously could look at using those funds and moving some of those funds from reserves to do those kind of things. If it, certainly, if the condition is to the point that it really needs to get done, we absolutely should do that. But even if it's not to that point, again, we talking about quality of life, right? So being able to walk safely in your neighborhood is a quality of life issue. So absolutely, that's a good use of those funds. All right. Anything else? Okay. Well, I thank you for. Oh, hold on. All right. One more question here. Let's see. All right. It says the city is in great shape. If folks are worried about parking issues as we grow, help explain a parking garage. Okay. Very good. Very good question. I am adamantly against a parking garage, and let me explain why. Parking garages, generally speaking, are underutilized. So think about it this way. So if you go to a big box store, let's say a Home Depot or Lowe's, right? Or Walmart, massive parking lot, right? Massive parking lot. How often do you go there when that parking lot is full? Maybe if it's during the Christmas shopping season, absolutely, or something like that. But the rest of the time, that parking lot is empty and is doing no good for that particular city. So that's the same thing with a parking garage. So we want to be able to, we want to avoid a tremendous expense for something that's only going to really solve a problem for big days like when our Third Fridays come back, our Fourth of July celebrations, and things like that. So, and we are getting away from parking garages in this country as well too. So the other problem is when you spend that much money to build one, um, in a couple years, maybe a decade from now, we may not need it anymore. And now what do we do with it? Now we have this big hunking thing of concrete that is not helping our city. So I'm not a big fan of that. What I am a big fan of is looking for ways to encourage people to not drive as much. Certainly, that works much better for folks that live downtown or near downtown. And one of the things I did as commissioner before is really work on improving walking and bicycling access, so folks can feel more comfortable walking or biking downtown if they are close enough rather than take the car down. And there are other creative outlets to alleviate parking issues in our city. I think the last thing we do, particularly in a city that cares about its environment so much, is take a piece of land and pave it over with 3, 4 stories of parking that, again, is going to be underutilized. That land could be used for something so much better. All right, questions are all coming in now. All right. Let's see. Curious whether the reserve funds could go towards the parks. North City has a lot of potential but isn't used much. Dunedin has an amazing splash pad. Would these funds be able to help with that? Or would that be another fund? Yes, absolutely. Those funds could be used for that. So a couple things I will say. A splash pad was debated when I was on commission, and it comes up every year or two. We as a city have kind of gotten away from that thought because of the ongoing maintenance cost of recirculated water. So what we've talked about instead is misting stations or things like that. Now that doesn't mean that we can't go that route with a splash pad, but just understand that it's not just the cost of building that, it's the cost of maintaining it. And that is a concern, again, as we want to keep the tax rate low. We want to provide great services. We want to be able to do great things that we see other cities like Dunedin doing. But it's not just the cost of building, it's the cost of maintaining. So keep that in mind. In terms of parks, I live 5 houses from North City Park. It's an absolute gem in our city. In fact, I had a friend who lives downtown who messaged me this week and said, "Hey, I'm at North City Park. This is fantastic." So I walked down and said hi to him, and he's like, "I had no idea it was here." And pardon me, again, selfishly, if those of us here in Harbor Woods Village and North Bay Hills, we don't like to tell people that this park is here because we like that it's our own little secret. But at the same time, that question that we just got about it may have potential. It was something that I was talking to that resident about because we have a fantastic playground there. We have a new dog run there as well too. Some great tennis courts. And basketball courts and some other recreational facilities, but a very large green space. In fact, actually, they used to have a baseball backstop there that they took out this year. So that green space is great for parties. Before COVID, we saw soccer games going on there. So it does get used. Could it get used more? Sure. The concern probably there is parking, going back to that last question. So that's a concern. Beyond that too, and we'll talk about this more again next week in quality of life, are our parks. We are so blessed to have so many great city parks. And that's not even counting Felipe Park, which is a county park, but a Safety Harbor asset, I think. So we have a tremendous amount of recreational facilities. In fact, there should be something we'll talk about next week called the level of service. The state puts out guidelines for what cities should have based on their population. And we are at or above almost all of those things in Safety Harbor. Again, fantastic, right? The one thing that we are way above the recommended level is park space. So does that mean we shouldn't have more parks? Not necessarily, but it does mean that the balance that we're talking about what we need in our community, we need to factor that. And right now, the balance is much heavier on the park side. So I would not probably be as excited about using that money to buy or develop more parks. But in the terms of the question of the North City Park, you could use some of that money to make a couple more amenities there to make it a little bit more exciting. All right, one more question, looks like. All right, I heard that Marshall Creek Park will put in a pickleball court. Well, I've been wanting to try this pickleball, and I haven't yet. So if that court gets in, then maybe that's the impetus I need to get there. I have not heard that myself. That doesn't mean that that's not going to happen. But again, so when we talk about adding some amenities to existing parks, that's a fantastic thing to consider. So if it's not being considered, we certainly should. If not at Marshall Park, at another park. Wow, all kinds of questions rolling in now. Let's see. Any ideas to take care of the odor from the stream? Is that Mullet Creek along 9th, right next to the pump station? I will say that is not something that I have had to address or am aware of. But again, going back to quality of life, we don't want our city to be stinky. So we will look into that and see what we can do in terms of that. And again, we have a lot of reserves. So if that's something that we need to spend some reserve money on, it's possible. Okay. It looks like that's all the questions for now. But if you think of something later on, or if you're watching this broadcast not live, again, go to votescottlong.com right here. And you can find my contact information, my email, my phone number, and get in touch with me and let me know what your concerns are. And obviously, I will continue to be walking around neighborhoods talking to you and addressing those concerns as well too. And of course, those of you who know me well know I am out and about quite often. So look for me and ask those questions when you see me. And looks like I've got one more thing. Oh yes, and if you joined late, as my wife reminded you, after the broadcast is done, it will be accessible under the video tab on Vote Scott Long, so you can watch from the beginning. And then also, as I mentioned, I will be working on getting it downloaded and uploaded to YouTube. And when that's done, I will be sure to share the link here in Vote Scott Long so you can watch it on YouTube, or again, share it with folks that do not have Facebook. Okay, thank you very much. Again, my name is Scott Long. I'm running for Safety Harbor City Commission seat number 3. Please visit Vote Scott Long for more information, and I will see you next Thursday when we'll talk about quality of life. Thank you very much.